Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Churchill Club. Tonight we have the rare privilege of listening in on a fresh and candid discussion between two industry leaders, David Goulden of EMC and Mark Garrett of Adobe. They will discuss a range of topics from the markets to innovation to leadership. David, Mark, thank you very, very much for being with us tonight. Thank you also to EMC for your support in making this event possible. A brief introduction to Churchill Club for those in the audience less familiar. We are Silicon Valley's premier independent technology and business forum, and we have been convening unique Silicon Valley conversations since 1985. And what drives us every day is to encourage innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. And we do this through the up to 40 programs that we present each year, where like minds, like the people in this room, can connect with ideas and with one another. We are a member-supported nonprofit organization, and we welcome you to join, participate, and get closer to the extraordinary conversations that we are igniting here on a regular basis. If you're tweeting tonight, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you will find other Twitter codes in your printed programs. Mark Garrett will guide the conversation for us tonight. Mark is Adobe's Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer. His influence at Adobe runs broad and deep. In addition to the many areas of responsibility that you can read about in Mark's official bio, he has also overseen strategic acquisitions such as the $1.8 billion acquisition of Omniture in 2009. Mark has also helped transform Adobe's business model from a shrink-wrap software company to one based on cloud offerings and a new charging model. He serves on a number of boards, including Informatica, and on the nonprofit side, the Children's Discovery Museum in San Jose. David Goulden is President and COO of EMC, where he oversees the company's business units, global sales, customer operations, services, marketing, and more. And he also serves as CFO, a role for which he was recognized by the Wall Street Journal as one of the 25 best CEOs in any industry. He too has played key roles in acquisitions, over 70, as it turns out, in the last 10 years, as well as business model innovations that I suspect we'll hear something about in the conversation this evening. He and Mark have a lot in common, but if we're lucky, we might even discover some areas where they look at the world a bit differently as well. Let's give our warmest Churchill Club welcome to David Goulden and Mark Garrett.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. David, it's great to see you again.
Mark, likewise.
So I'm usually in David's seat. This is the first time I've ever done the interviewing side of this, so I have some cheat sheets. Yeah, I'm doing great already.
Doing great so far.
Thank you. So all I ask David is one thing. I'm one of these very structured, very OCD. You can ask anybody at that table. CFO types, and we're not deviating from these cards.
Okay, okay, I'll stay with it.
So David and I actually go way back about 11 years when EMC acquired Documentum. I was the CFO at Documentum when EMC bought us. And I have a T-shirt that says I survived a David Goulden-led acquisition.
That's true. Several people don't, so you're in a rare class. You're in a rare class. So.
Yeah, actually, to EMC's credit, I think they did a great job, and we'll talk about this, continue to do a great job of acquiring companies, integrating companies, keeping key talent. And I actually stayed on with EMC for 3 years. So your first learning of the night is that CFO in an acquisition does not always mean certainly first out. Right? So what I thought I'd do is kind of transition to more personal things and talk about you a little bit, David, to get the crowd to get to know you a little bit. Obviously, that's not a Southern United States accent.
This
right?
is a native New England accent. I've been perfecting it for the last 50 years to try and sound as Bostonian as I possibly can. So I know, I failed.
So from England, a degree in physics from Durham University. Help us with the route from physics in England to operations and finance in US tech.
All right, I'll try and keep that as short as possible, not to bore you all for the next hour and a half with that story. Physics in England was something good to do while I was playing tennis at college. You had to study doing something while you're playing tennis, so I did physics. And then I stumbled into selling computers. So there's a natural correlation there. I've never actually found out the answer why they were correlated, but they are. And joined a US company back then called Burroughs Machines, which of course people know became Unisys, and had a chance to develop a career with them. Did an MBA over in the UK for a couple of years, a 2-year exec program. Opened my horizons, made me realize that there wasn't much computer industry left in Europe, so I got the heck out of there quickly. Came over to the States in '89, working for them with what was Unisys. Had a chance to get to meet Joe Tucci, who a number of people know, and Joe and I have had fairly similar careers from that point forward. I was with Unisys for a few years. We both went to Wang. We sold Wang to a Dutch company called Getronics. And 2002, I joined EMC, and I've been here at EMC 2002 till 2013.
That's great. And you've really excelled. I mean, I think what's remarkable is you've really excelled on the operational side and the financial side, which some CFOs do well, and frankly, some don't. So what would you is that based on your physics background?
Yeah, it's all to do with physics and tennis. There's nothing else. It's just physics and tennis. They get you through most things in life. You know, actually, this is a funny story, and I'll admit it now, having been CFO for 7+ years. My first job in finance was as CFO. So I had not had a job in finance before I was CFO. So somebody was pretty brave and took a chance and put somebody who was a business and operations person, obviously with some sales and marketing background, a lot of M&A background, a lot of corporate development background, plopped him in the finance role. And it was a question of, get it in there and swim, and if you sink, I guess we're going to let you sink. And if you swim, you're going to do okay. So what I found is over the years, having done that role, I think the fact that having an operations background really helped.
Right.
The good news was I was made CFO of a company that had a really strong finance team. So there was a strong controllership, strong treasury, strong tax, and really I was kind of the business general of that team. So I think that, Mark, you would probably share this view that the most important thing in being a good CFO, number one, is partnering with the business, right? You want to try and facilitate the business to get to places where it couldn't get. The second most important part is really being able to communicate with the street. And if you know the business, that makes life much easier. And then the third part of it is kind of dealing with all the kind of board, regulatory, compliance type items. And having a business background with a fair amount of finance spattered in there was actually worked out okay.
And it certainly helps. I know from the first QBR, Quarterly Business Review, that I had to do in Hopkinton after we were acquired, David had a stack of papers about this high, and as I went through the numbers, he would pull out a piece of paper in there just to verify that
evidence for the jury.
And then the other half was in his head, so you definitely have a head for numbers, which certainly helps. So what makes you, from your perspective, and maybe the people you admire, a great leader? I mean, you talked about what makes a great CFO, but what do you think makes a great leader these days?
I think the fundamental thing to realize, the very first place to start, is that people talk about us being in the tech industry. We're not. We're in the people industry.
Right.
There is no tech industry. There's no company without the people. So if you can't attract the people, and you can't create the right environment for the people to be successful, and you can't help people develop winning strategies and winning teams, then the rest doesn't matter. I mean, we're only as good as, any one of our companies are only as good and are completely as good as the people who are a member of that team. So if you start with that premise, everything else kind of falls naturally in place. And I think that the role of a good leader is to get the right people and to facilitate that team to be successful. There's none of us in the companies around the room where the individual kind of hero, super person, CEO, CFO, whatever, can go do everything themselves, because you get to a scale where you just need to facilitate the team. So it's all about getting the right people in place, getting the right culture, the right systems, the right motivation. So it's the soft side of the job that really actually makes a difference.
Now, speaking of culture, I always get this question, but I'm not sure there's a great answer to it, but I'll try. How would you define EMC's culture?
We are a meritocracy. I think that's really important. people who work for the company are very passionate about the company, but also recognize that there's nothing stopping you getting forward. You can get to anywhere you want to inside of EMC. There's a huge sense of association and teamwork and pride. And I think everybody realizes that it's a company where if you're successful, you dedicate, you work hard, you can go to places you hadn't even dreamt. I mean, who else would have dropped a CFO into a finance job and never had a job in finance before? I mean, there's one crazy example, but it does occur in many places inside our company. And again, it's back to developing the team, developing the people.
Right. And how about any career advice for the people in the room, that some tidbits that you learned along the way?
Yeah, I mean, you never get the second chance to make a first impression.
Right.
And you always bump into somebody again in life.
Especially out here in the valley, that's
Particularly
true.
in the valley, right? So
Yeah.
those are two important things. You may think that, I'm going to deal with this problem this way, this time, and I won't have to worry about it, but you will.
So with the broad role that you have with this finance and basically all the operations of EMC, how do you manage your time and divide that up between the different roles?
Well, it's changed. Obviously, I've been in the president role for just over years. Over that time, the amount of time I'm spending on what is the CFO functions, I've tried to create an environment where I'm probably spending time on the 25%, the things that need my touch, and getting my finance team to do more of that side, and kind of 75% on the operations side. And of course, we'll talk about EMC and a bit more about the model, but we've got this fascinating or unique business model going where we have a federation of companies.
Right.
So we've got the EMC company, which I run on a day-to-day basis, and where I really spend my time as CFO are those things that cut across the company. So things that impact VMware, things that impact Pivotal, things that impact how the company deals with Wall Street, and more of the operational side of the CFO. I've been able to build a team to take that on and do it for me.
Great. Okay, a couple quick personal things, and then we'll get off all this touchy-feely HR stuff, which neither one of us is really very comfortable with.
You see, Rachel. What's that thing about being a people company, Mark?
Yeah, right.
Work with me a little bit.
So what do you like to do outside of work?
I still like to play tennis. I don't play as well as I used to, but I still play a couple of times a week. And I was fortunate to get involved with the International Tennis Hall of Fame, which is a group down in Newport, where they recognize current and past greats. And through that, I've been able to bump into a lot of interesting people: Stan Smith, Lindsay Davenport, Bud Collins, you name it. I've been able to just socialize with that crowd. It's fascinating to be able to meet and spend time with people who are obviously excelling at something that I have a passion in. So I spend a lot of my time outside work doing that.
Okay, and a couple quick sports questions, and then we'll move on to
Are these trivia questions, or are these?
No
okay,
trivia. So football, or as we've renamed it, soccer?
Soccer, sorry.
Yeah,
Soccer.
Okay.
But we won't go there. Jeremy, where's Jeremy gone? He's very cheering.
And cricket, or as we've reinvented it, baseball?
That's a tough one, because I would actually go with baseball on that one, because
Really?
I can't stand watching a game for 5 days. I mean, I have patience, but that's beyond my patience.
Okay, so Red Sox, given where EMC resides, or Yankees, given where your CEO's allegiance lies?
No question. We love the Red Sox, and we love the fact that he loves the Yankees. So that works well for all of us.
But Joe is a huge Yankee fan, right?
Huge Yankee fan.
Yeah.
I don't think he's ever even set foot inside Fenway Park.
Oh, really? Okay.
Or else, if he did, then he kind of changed his shoes when he left the stadium or something. I don't know.
Okay, so let's move on the HR theme to the way EMC is organized today. You talked about the federated model, but there's, I listed 4 kind of considerable evolutions EMC's gone through over the past 10 years. First is acquiring 70 companies for $15 billion with a tremendous success rate. We'll come back to M&A. The demographics from the company have changed dramatically from Hopkinton to global. You've kind of created this big presence in Silicon Valley, which was never here, and this federated model you've moved to, right? So could you talk about that transition?
Yeah, because they're all kind of related, but let me give you a couple of facts and figures. You can tell I really am a part-time CFO, just in case people are concerned about that. So back in 2002, EMC was clearly a storage company. We had about $5.4 billion of revenue, almost exactly 20,000 people that year. And a little under 40% of the workforce was in Massachusetts.
And it was
So,
primarily hardware, right?
yeah, hardware and software, but yeah, it was a systems company. It was a storage systems company. Certainly, we didn't have many software-only products. We probably still had more software engineers than hardware engineers, but everything was packaged in sheet metal.
Into the
storage
box,
rays.
right?
Exactly, right. So you roll the clock forward to last year, 2012. So we were $21.7 billion revenue, so basically exactly 4 times as much. We had 60,000 people, so exactly 3 times in May, so there's a little bit of leverage in the business model. The Massachusetts presence, whilst it's grown, is now less than 20% of the company. So we really are a global company, so we've gone from close to 40 to less than 20. We have grown that headcount, but nothing like as fast as we've grown in the rest of the world. Where we have grown our headcount, huge presence in the Silicon Valley. Well over 7,000 people here in Northern Cal. And then we have a team up in Seattle as well, so that would add to that. Also in global centers of excellence around the world, 7,000 people sitting in global centers that we didn't even have back in 2002. So that's kind of where a lot of the growth has been. From a business mix point of view, we've actually, again, adding these numbers up, we spent $30 billion on technology over the last 10 years. And it's almost been exactly 50%, $15 billion on R&D, and $15 billion on acquisitions. And as you mentioned, that includes 70 companies, obviously some which are much more known, Documentum, Legato, VMware, et cetera, Data Domain, Avamar, Isilon, but a lot of smaller ones that people don't know as much. What's interesting is we grew by $16.4 billion, the amount of growth that we've got between them. The acquisitions themselves only brought in $2.3 billion of revenue. If you annualize the revenue that we bought when we bought this company, it's 2.3. So we grew that 2.3 to about 9.5, right? And the 5.4 that we had, we also grew to 12.2. So we've had this dual innovation strategy where we've been able to get significant growth from the base that we started off with. We've at the same time been able to buy, integrate, and leverage companies. And you kind of go through that journey. Then the third part of the journey is obviously the aperture of the company is much, much wider. Back in 2002, really was a storage platform, storage systems company. Now we kind of think of ourselves as a company getting poised to really play aggressively in the third platform, which is focused around cloud, mobile, social, big data, trust. And we've got ourselves organized into this federation, which we'll come back to, Pivotal, VMware, and EMC. So we've innovated in the business model. We've significantly changed the footprint. We've bought and integrated 70-plus companies and a total investment of $30 billion. So it's a huge, huge amount of change. And each of those, I guess each one of those by themselves would be a fair amount of change, but to do all 4 of those, I think has really been one of the things that we're most proud of.
And let's talk about the federated model. I think it started with VMware when I was there, right?
Yeah, we couldn't have a federation until we had 3. Two isn't a federation. So I'm not quite sure what the right word for 2 is, but we thought once we got to 3, we'd do a federation. But you're right, it did start with VMware.
And so explain how that works and how you run the company under this model.
Yeah, and obviously by definition, it does add a bit of complication because it's easier just to say, hey, one size fits all. But the play that we played with VMware, we're going to run the same play with Pivotal as and when it gets to the appropriate time to take it partially public. The play with VMware was to recognize that they were businesses that were related in terms of they needed to work together, but they needed to be free to go and kind of partner with who they wanted to partner with to be successful. And they needed to do it under a governance model where they weren't being constrained. So if you look at the early stages, one of the first things we said with VMware is we're not going to integrate this company. We're going to keep it separate, whereas other companies, we integrate very aggressively. So having a playbook that lets you have more than one play for the integration is very important. So start off with VMware and say, look, VMware needs to go partner with people who don't like EMC storage. So VMware would go and partner with HP and Dell and NetApp and all the other players in the storage industry who, if they thought that Big Brother EMC storage business was watching over the shoulder, that partnering wouldn't be anything like as successful. So that proved to be successful, and of course we took VMware partially public in 2007. We did that for a couple of reasons. One was to reinforce that independence. The other was to create a currency to go and attract the best and bright in the Valley, because we're sitting there right on Stanford campus, and you know the location very well, and we're competing with all the well-known names for the best and brightest, engineers and salespeople, et cetera. So we had that currency in order to do that, and of course to unlock some value as well.
So to unlock some value of EMC, right?
Unlock some value of VMware for the EMC shareholders, because again, when VMware was just part of the EMC consolidated numbers, people could only buy a share of EMC shares. Now they can buy VMware. In the future, at the appropriate time, we'll be able to buy into Pivotal as well.
So you talked about the complexity. How do you manage the company P&L with that kind of a model? I mean, how do you forecast the business? How do you plan the business when you've got potentially interests in all these different companies down the road?
For a P&L process, it's no different really than you would run if you were running a more conventional consolidated company. You're relying upon forecasts from the business units.
From them.
Yeah. And wearing my CFO hat, there's a CFO at VMware, there's a CFO at Pivotal, and we're rolling up those books. What's different is the governance model. So we run VMware through a board of directors. So VMware's fiduciary responsibility is to its board. Obviously, EMC people sit on the board. I'm one of the board members of VMware, but we have people from outside the company, and we set up a board of director structure for Pivotal as well. So we run these businesses through boards of directors, so they really do view that their responsibility is to that board who's looking in the best interest of the company. But then, with us wearing our CFO hats, we still operate the company and consolidate those numbers. Obviously, again, we have to deconsolidate the piece that we don't own, but it also lets us do interesting things. So, for example, we created Pivotal back on April 1. We took assets out of EMC, assets out of VMware, all related to the big data opportunity, put them together into a 1,200-person startup, and within a month, we'd attracted a $105 million investment from General Electric, who thought that what we're doing was so potentially transformational that as they move to the third platform and you go to telemetry and everything that GE does produces tons of data, and how are they going to really mine that data to change their business, they thought that was sufficiently exciting for them to put that amount of money down. And the fact that we've got the model let us do that. A few weeks later, we announced that IBM had decided to come in and support the Cloud Foundry platform that we're building with Pivotal. So examples of investments and partnerships that would have been exceptionally difficult to do if it had all been inside a consolidated company. So that's the benefit. And obviously, there is cost and there is some level of complexity, but we think the benefit outweighs it several times.
And then the corporate infrastructure you leverage for the other companies?
Yeah, what we do is we have a very, very slim corporate infrastructure. We really do leverage the EMC corporate infrastructure wherever we can for the other companies. So things like facilities when you go to countries that are a long way from home, centers of excellence, things like that. Certain things that we will try and do globally, like treasury functions and raising debt. So, for example,
I'm sorry.
So, for example, EMC just did a $5.5 billion debt offering. We do that on behalf of the parent to kind of look at the whole company.
What about things like the IT infrastructure? You leverage that as well?
Thanks.
My CIO is here, so.
We actually let the systems run reasonably separately.
Oh, you do? Okay.
We do. We let the systems teams run quite separately. Again, letting the company decide what it wants to do for the business model. So that's one area where we let things run separately. Each company will have its own HR group, its own finance group. Operationally, some of the corporate finance functions will be corporate-wide. But for example, by definition, VMware has their own IR team because they've got to deal with the street. Right? They've got a significant market cap, and they have an IR team that works closely coordinated with the EMC one.
Okay. All right. Well, let's spice it up a little bit.
All right.
I think since I was at EMC, people have been speculating as to Joe's successor, and there's lots of talk about how long he's going to keep doing this, and where are we at with all that? When are we going to know who Joe's successor really is?
It's a great question. I'm not going to duck it, but believe it or not, true story, we don't spend time on that right now, and I'll tell you why.
Because all of these people do.
Well, they may not, but let me explain why we don't. Because the federation, I being more than two, being three, is very new. We really just kind of declared that at our Analyst Day in March, February this year. And everybody in senior roles in the federation, myself, Pat, Paul, including Joe, are in completely different roles in the last 12 months. And I know there's a lot of speculation, but it's just not something that our plates are so full right now that we're actually out trying to execute this model. There's no more to it than that. So speculation will have to continue to be out there.
And where's Joe spending his time? It sounds like you're running the place.
Is that a leading question, Mark? Are you asking the same question twice here or something?
All right, well, let's move on. So from an industry perspective, speaking of Joe, I saw that he has said we're kind of 2 years into this 10-year wave of change in the industry, and the big shift to the cloud is both the most opportunistic and the most disruptive. I mean, how does that play into what you guys are doing from an EMC point of view?
It's what we spend a lot of our time thinking about, and we think about these different platforms. And obviously, the first platform was the mainframe era that lasted many years. In fact, it's still going quite strong inside of IBM. Second platform, client server, 90s and 2000s. Again, there's still decent growth in the second platform. But the third platform of computing, where you move from tens of thousands of apps to millions of apps and billions of users all interconnected, the key underlying technologies there: cloud, mobile, social, big data. The third platform will transition and transform the way that industries work. And the technologies that you need and the type of applications people are building in the third platform, the data sets dwarf the traditional structured data sets. And it's a huge issue with our customers. I mean, almost every customer interaction I have, they want help. They know it's out there. They want help to get to it. They also want help to make sure they get cost out of the second platform. So how can they run the second platform more efficiently? How can they move much more of the money to the third platform? So it's the application that is the biggest change. Now, in parallel, that third platform creates a level of mobility that didn't exist inside the second platform. So in the second platform, most people's IT departments were absolutely fixed and everything ran inside the IT world. In the third platform, you see the advent of cloud, SaaS providers. Many of these third platform apps run on infrastructures that look a bit more like a public cloud infrastructure than it does look like a second platform infrastructure inside of a data center, although customers are going to build these third platform infrastructures inside the data centers as well. So you've got a technology shift to the third platform. You've got a delivery shift in terms of where people can run these applications. We're probably in the first innings. I mean, it's going to be another 20-year trend. But what we've been doing, it's part of really why we set the federation up this way, is to have as many assets as we possibly can in the third platform. So Pivotal is building apps only for the third platform. We're not dealing with any second platform apps in Pivotal. VMware is helping people kind of improve their client server, as well as kind of help in the cloud and mobile side of the fence. And inside of EMC, in the storage business, a phenomenal amount of investment in things like object-oriented HDFS platforms, software-defined storage, flash, things that are really important for winning in the third platform infrastructure. So it's a fascinating puzzle.
And do you see the private cloud and the public clouds kind of coming together?
Yeah, I think there's obviously the public cloud has been a wake-up call for a lot of IT departments.
Right.
Amazon has done a phenomenal job at showing how easy and agile IT can be, right? So you and I can go on, sign up with a credit card, get some compute time, get some storage and get going. And then you ask how many people, well, how's your internal IT operation? Does it look like Amazon? Everybody nods and goes to sleep and says, no, I can't do that. So it's been a real wake-up call. So there's a huge amount of focus and money being spent by IT departments trying to turn what they have today into true private clouds. Clouds that can be provisioned, that are agile. You can dial up, you can dial down, you can do internal billing. You can abstract the application from physical infrastructure. And we believe that actually for most people in the audience, the transformation of today's data centers into private clouds is the biggest opportunity. Now, there's going to be coexistence. A study that we did recently, we looked out to 2016 and we said, what percentage of enterprise workloads are going to be running outside the enterprise? And we think that's going to grow enormously to close to 15%. But it still means that 85% of those workloads are running inside the enterprise. So again, that'll change industry by industry, but across a whole range of industries. When we did a workload study, that's where we think things are going to go. So there's absolutely a huge opportunity in helping the cloud companies develop and build their areas, but there's a massive opportunity in helping people transition IT into true private cloud.
And how does the company think about security and privacy as it relates to all of this? Well,
that's one of the facilitators and potentially one of the inhibitors. security in the third platform, if you don't have security, people are just not going to adopt it. It's going to be either a barrier or an acceptor. So security, and of course, one of the reasons why we got into the RSA business with, back in 2006, back in your days, Mark, when we got into security, was recognizing that security was absolutely critical. Now, the good news is that the security industry is going to change drastically. So in the second platform, all of your controls are static and they're bolted onto servers, they're bolted onto firewalls, they're bolted inside of terminals. In the third platform, it's all adaptive, it's risk-based, it's actually a big data problem. So there's a huge amount of synergy between what we're doing on the big data side and what we're doing on the security side.
Okay, great. How about from a product pipeline perspective? I mean, what do we see coming down the pipe from EMC from a product point of view?
Well, we're a technology company, so I mean, that's our roots. Whilst we offer great services around our products, we're a product company. Hence the dual innovation strategy, right? The roughly 12% of revenues each year on R&D, and roughly on average about 10% of revenues each year on M&A. So the pipeline is very, very strong. If I start with the application side, on Pivotal, since we created it, we're really working hard to create something called Pivotal One, which will be the first true PaaS developer platform for big, fast data applications. We'll bring that to market in the fourth quarter. VMware, we're coming up to VMworld, which is kind of where the big release cycle is for VMware. So expect a whole lot of things without stealing Pat's thunder, and they probably kill me for announcing everything that's going to come up VMworld, so I won't do that. And then on the EMC information infrastructure side, we have some huge launches coming up. We're launching a refreshed mid-range platform. We just refreshed all of our data domain products. We've got some flash products coming up later in the year with Extreme.io. We've got the big Viper software-defined storage launch. We've got exciting things happening in security content management. So there's a constant innovation engine that is running and running rapidly. And then there'll be another set in the first half of next year as well.
And how would you kind of characterize your competitive strength against other people in the market? I read that you're more of a kind of horizontal technology stack versus maybe some others that were more vertical. Is that?
Yeah, I think it comes at a couple of levels, Mark. It comes the fact that at the federation level, what we do, again, because of the model, Pivotal, VMware, EMC, we give our customers choice. We don't say you have to buy the complete stack from EMC. Right. We hope that they will, but we recognize that some won't. And so if you want to buy Pivotal and you want to run it on an Amazon cloud, or you want to run it on an Azure cloud, or you want to run it on OpenStack, that's fine. We'll support all those environments. And in fact, sometimes having choice helps, because if you haven't got choice, people do think you are locked in. So having choice actually in many cases helps the parts of the family work together. Same thing with VMware, same thing with EMC. EMC storage platforms, if I go to the storage end, will work great in a VMware environment, but they'll work with Hyper-V, they'll work with OpenStack. So we give people choice, and that's a very important thing at the CIO level. If I come down and I kind of look at the information infrastructure business, I think that one of the things that we've been successful at is that we are the only company out there that have really taken the approach that we want to play best of breed rather than one size fits all, and we want to cover all the major workload use cases in the enterprise, from your most high performance client server, transaction oriented app, out to your scale out apps, into the third platform. We can offer the entire portfolio, and that has required us to invest and put some bets down, but we really are the only people out there with that complete portfolio. And again, that gives customers comfort, particularly when they're struggling with how do I get money out my second platform more efficiently, how do I move into the third platform? Do I have to work with one person? Do I have to work with 3 or 4? And we can give them that one person to work with that layer of the system.
So at Adobe, I would say, or we would say, that our main customer is the CMO. And we want to be the marketing company selling to the CMO. I would suspect you would say you want to be the main kind of partner to the CIO, right?
It is the CIO, but it's often the CFO, believe it or not.
So that's what I was just going to ask is, I would think given the capital investment that it's a lot of times the CFO as well.
It is, but the big data side of things is very often to line of business people.
Okay.
So our big data storage platform, so we bought a company called Isilon a couple of years ago that's a very successful part of the portfolio. That sale typically tends to be to the application user who has a real application requirement, and they look for the scale-out file system to support a big data app, and then IT will endorse it. So it's actually much more mixed than you might think. More of our traditional client-server transaction engines will be going into the CIO, but increasingly, and then particularly if you want to talk about transformation to the third platform, I mean, that is often a CMO, a CEO discussion. So the agenda point has changed.
Okay. So your sales teams, if they're doing their jobs right, are selling to way more than just the CIO.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what would you say to the IT people in the room about staying competitive and helping to drive the business? I mean, how should they be thinking about running their companies?
IT people as users of our technology?
Yes.
Very simple. You've got to have a plan for the third platform. If you haven't got a plan for the third platform, you're going to be out of a job. Simple as that. You need to figure out what that means to your company. That doesn't mean to say you have to run out and put everything on a cloud. Cloud doesn't mean third platform. A lot of second platform apps will run in clouds as well. But you've got to have a plan for the third platform. How are you going to leverage these new technologies to help your business model change? Think of sector by sector. Think of what's going to happen to places like the insurance industry by having telemetry coming out of cars, so you can see how well people are driving, and you'll adjust their policy. Think of GE, who put the big investment in the Pivotal. What are they trying to do? They are trying to recognize that the information their products produce is as valuable as the product itself. And if they can monetize that information to give the customer lower cost, better experience, help them get more value from the product. Apparently, if you have the telemetry right on a power station, you can actually generate between 2 and 5% more power for the same amount of capital money. That's a big improvement. You can't do that without big data. Right. Jet engines, as 747s fly across the Atlantic, they produce terabytes of data each crossing that quickly amounts to petabytes. What that will let GE do is now do service as needed, not service on every kind of routine period of time. Right. That cuts down the cost for them, it cuts down the cost for the airline, improves reliability. So, I mean, every industry in this room and everyone outside this room is going to be impacted by this shift.
Good. So let's shift over to M&A a little bit. You touched on kind of organic versus M&A. I mean, how do you think about it? Do you literally think about it as you want half to each?
It's really how it's worked out. It's really a question of how much can we afford, right? Because in most cases, M&A is a different form of R&D. Right. Because not every team can build everything it wants to. Not every company can build all it wants to. Now, obviously, if you're moving into an adjacent industry, it's very more than just the R&D. You're picking up the business model and all the rest of it. So obviously, when we first acquired VMware back in 2004, that was moving into a different sector, right? When we acquired you and the team in Documentum in 2003, that was moving into a different sector. But in most cases, and even in those cases, the core asset really is the technology, right? And then the business builds around it. So what is really interesting is having been involved in all these acquisitions, and I think I've been involved in most of them, you really have to have a bit of a feel for how these are going to work. I mentioned before, you can't take a one-size-fits-all approach. You've got to understand what you're buying it for, how close to your core is it, is there a people fit? We've walked away from several acquisitions that looked fantastic on paper and the numbers all worked, but we didn't think the team was going to gel. And then you've got to decide how you want to integrate it. We probably have about 5 different playbooks for how we want to integrate a company based upon how big it is, where it is, what industry it's in, whether we try and do a market expansion with it, whether we try and do a consolidation with it. It winds up there's about 5 different models that you need to apply. And even then, you need to really have a little bit of finesse to not try and force the model down on people.
You're obviously doing something right. The success rate's been really high, and I know how hard it is to do M&A. So what would you tell people, best practices around doing those deals, both getting the deal done and then integrating them, because it's tough.
Getting the deals done is the easy part. It's easy to spend money, right? You can come along, big CFO, I've got a big checkbook, I'll buy you, spend money. That's not the hard part, although there is obviously the art of the deal and getting the deal done properly, but I don't want to insult the M&A people in the room. I realize that my M&A team's sitting there, so I just trashed the M&A team. Sorry, guys, I didn't mean it. But it's not the hard part compared to getting it right afterwards. So again, it's being really clear with what you're trying to do with the acquisition and being as an open up front, because there's nothing upsets people more than having the bait and switch. So you can't go in and say, I'm going to do no harm if you plan to integrate them 6 months later, because all you do is you'll upset everybody. So you have to be very clear. The other thing that we found is, particularly for the big acquisitions, it's very important to put people from EMC inside the acquired company.
Right.
Because if you are an acquired company and all of a sudden your nameplate changed and nothing else changed, you try to understand how you deal with this 60,000 person company that obviously has its way of doing things, and you had your own way of doing things. So we found that dropping key people in, at least one person on the executive team, and then some functional folks. Obviously, the first things which we look at are the HR, finance, systems side and things. But rather than just go take them over, drop key people in to help the integration process. That is absolutely a best practice. And then an interesting thing, I'll tell you a little bit of way in terms of how we track these things. The other thing is getting somebody on the hook inside the company for the success of the company. So what we do is every time we have an acquisition, there is an executive whose bonus is tied to the success of that acquisition. And beyond that, we also run an M&A review process. So for the first 5 quarters, any company, we run a quarterly process. So the executive sponsor and the leadership team of the M&A group come in, and Joe, myself, and Jeremy, and others who are in the room, we have a review process where we basically grade the success of the acquisition. And I think that's more powerful than the bonus factor, because we have a conversation about how it's doing financially, operationally, strategically, how much leverage we're getting, et cetera. Is the integration on track? And that peer pressure is as powerful, if not more powerful. And by the way, if you get a failing grade, you come back every quarter until you get a passing grade. So if you're really doing badly, you could be in the kind of lion's den for 8 different quarters, and nobody wants that. So they want to get out, and they want to get themselves on the passing grade side of things.
And what about M&A from an industry perspective? I mean, there's M&A's picked up, nothing on the really large side, though. I mean, how do you think about tech M&A now as an industry, and do you think the bigger deals will come back at some point?
It's an interesting question, because it comes back to the big shift in second platform, third platform. By definition, there aren't very many big third platform companies,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
Because it's all relatively new. So it's quite possible there may be some consolidation plays for second platform companies that want to try and buy investment dollars and runway. That's never been something that we're particularly keen on doing, because you go through a big integration exercise, and unless it's highly accretive, then you really slow everybody down for a long period of time. So I think that what you're seeing is a lot of innovation and startup, which is always a great thing, because our industry has always been fantastic at that, and if it wasn't that way, it wouldn't be the fun place to work that it is. So lots of innovation around these trends, which I mentioned. Those are the companies which are garnering the attention. So I think that's kind of where more of the opportunity sits right now.
More on the medium to smaller side.
Small, medium companies, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then this wouldn't be a CFO to sort of CFO chat. You've elevated above the CFO without a financial discussion. You guys had a good Q2. You were pretty upbeat on the second half. I mean, what do you see going on out there from an economic perspective?
Yeah, I don't think any of us are getting a lot of help from the broader economic environment right now. I mean, we think that global IT spend this year is going to be maybe 3% growth, and we think it was more like 2% growth last year, so a little bit of a pickup, but not much. I think 2 facts. I think people are still cautious about the macro, although maybe there's some good signs. We all read the same papers. Looks like Germany seems to be doing better. Maybe China's slowdown isn't going to be quite as severe as people thought. So there's some a little bit of glimpses of light there, but I think people are generally cautious about the macro.
Yet the markets are all-time high.
The markets are high, but you've got to figure out, perhaps somebody knows something more than we do about that. But and then the other thing is, I really do see customers struggling with this again, concept of second platform, third platform, where they spend their dollars. And that can sometimes cause a little bit of a pause whilst they work things out. So I don't think the macro is helping any of us. But But I do think that there's money out there, right? Obviously, the market is at an all-time high. U.S. companies got record amounts of cash on the balance sheet, so it's not as if the money isn't out there. So those people who are on the kind of better side of what may be called the IT rust belts, people who are kind of moving forward, getting into that third platform as well as straddling the second, are growing faster than the market. In the last couple of quarters, we've been growing at 6%. We think we're going to grow faster than that in the second half, partially because of a year-on-year compare in IT spending. But if we're right that IT spending is growing about 3%, and it probably grew a bit less than 3% in the first half, it'll probably grow a little bit more than 3% in the second half just because of the compare. And we did 6% in the first half, and we expect to do 8% for the year. Then we're on the right side of that equation.
How about from a vertical market perspective? Any unique challenges vertically, government or financial services maybe?
I think the trends which I spoke about really are pretty general.
Across the board.
Across the board. I mean, obviously you've got sequestration and other things happening that are impacting federal spend, although all of us in the room hope that this quarter will be a good quarter for our federal businesses because that's obviously the end of the federal fiscal, so we should all do well there. But I think the problems I talked about are pretty generic. And whether it's third platform transformation or whether it's views on the macro, the industry, the government spending side, it's all fairly consistent.
And I think you've got a goal of 10% growth, right, on a CAGR perspective?
Yeah, we got a goal of actually 9% CAGR out there right now from 2012 to 2016, which would put us a little over $30 billion in 2016.
So you've got to drive an incremental couple $1 billion of revenue every year.
We have to grow $2 billion plus a year. Exactly.
And you see that as a mix of organic and inorganic, I would say.
And it's a mix of both. Again, it's really a mix of organic and inorganic, but the inorganic, essentially, once you buy it, has to become organic growth because you don't buy companies with revenue. So back to my comment before, we've only bought $2.3 billion of revenue over the last 10 years, and the rest of that has been growth. So I believe that realistically, you can take claim for organic growth, for the revenue growth beyond the point of time which you bought the company.
And just this is maybe for me more than everybody in the room, but do you manage EMC internally to one P&L, or do you break it down into several P&Ls that are fully allocated type P&Ls, separate from maybe what you do with VMware and ultimately
Yeah, I mean, obviously VMware is clear,
Those
full
are separate,
P&L, Pivotal is a full P&L.
But how about just core EMC? How do you manage internally?
We absolutely calculate P&Ls all the way down, product line P&Ls.
You do?
We calculate them, but in some cases, 80% of that product line P&L may be owned by the business unit. In other cases, maybe only 40% is owned, and big things like sales and service and things wind up being shared. But and then if you're a really emerging product like our flash business unit, then you own a bigger piece of it. So the smaller you are, typically you own more of it. As you get bigger, you become mainstream. It becomes more of a calculated P&L, and I'm sure everybody in the room is familiar with that concept.
Right. How about on the government side, government reform side of things? What do you think happens here with tax reform or immigration reform, and how badly do we need? I think we need them both pretty badly.
Well, I was
think
ask you about
everybody
that one, Mark, as well.
in the room probably does.
Yeah.
But
on immigration reform, I think it's a shame that we can't find a way to retain more of the overseas students who we educate in the U.S. We have the best education system in the world. And because of immigration rules, the vast majority of those people wind up going back to their native countries.
Right.
And it'd be great to get more of that talent here. I mean, it's also great that we're contributing to world knowledge and all the rest of it, but I think we should be a little bit more selfish and keep more of it here. On tax reform, I think that you and I would both agree there's something that should be done.
Something wrong. We have the highest tax rate in the world, right?
The highest tax rate in the world. We can't really treat our global treasury as fungible because the way the tax system works. So there has to be a balance between getting an effective tax rate that lets us use our money tangibly, fungibly, and I think that's going to be huge for U.S. companies. I mean, if all of us in the room had access to our international cash without any restrictions on it, albeit with some kind of a tax, which we would be prepared to pay, it makes your strategic options just much, much wider. Now, obviously, there are ways of borrowing against it and things like that, but it's different from having it all fungible.
You guys obviously have a lot of cash offshore too, right?
We do. We've actually been successful with kind of structuring some of our acquisitions to use some international cash.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have in the US, at the end of last quarter, we had about $9 billion of US cash excluding VMware. So we got a fair amount of flexibility there, but we'd love to see our international cash repatriated on an equitable basis as well.
Okay, I'm with you on that one. So from a go-to-market perspective, any changes with kind of this tenure evolution of EMC and how you guys sell? It's been primarily a direct sales model, right?
Actually, it has, but if I think of our storage business in total right now, over 50% through partners.
Okay.
And if I think of the mid-tier storage business, so I take out our Symmetrics, over 75% through partners. So there's been a significant transformation in the go-to-market model. A lot of that is leverage partner work. I would not sit here and say we really have a true volume channel, but we've certainly been able to bring partners in to the mid-market, even to the enterprise, and have them successfully work with our teams. And our sales teams are agnostic to a channel. In fact, in the mid-market space, our sales teams cannot take an order directly.
Do your reps sell the whole product line, or are they specialized to aspects of the product?
Within the storage business, we have territory reps who are quoted upon the entire product line. And then depending upon the business unit or the type of product, we'll then have specialty sales teams working with them. And in every case amongst our pre-sales world, there are pre-sales specialists that the product groups can look at directly as part of their extended team.
And the core team would sell across VMware and Pivotal as well?
We actually don't do that.
We don't do that?
No, we don't. Deliberately, that was one of the things that we did not do when we brought in VMware. We did back to this letting it run as a federated model. We didn't want an HP or a NAP person working with VMware who we want to work with VMware to think that there was an EMC rep lurking around a corner when they left the room. So we've kept it that way.
Okay. How about from a corporate social responsibility point of view? We do a lot at Adobe where we kind of pride ourselves on being green and being fairly positive from a corporate social responsibility point of view. What's EMC's role in that?
Yeah, it's actually one I think one of the most fun parts of all of our jobs.
Right.
From an EMC point of view, we've really focused upon STEM as a topic, science and education, mathematics, et cetera, to try and help build those skill sets, because we believe that across the IT industry, having people with that skill set is critical to our success. And we do it at a couple of different levels. We do a lot of grassroots routes, so almost everything that we start off with starts off with a STEM background. So great example I came across recently, our Center of Excellence in Bangalore went into work with a bunch of local schools to try and help with math and mathematics and engineering skills. And they noticed that in the school district that they were working with, there was a really low attendance of teenage girls. And they figured out that the reason was that the whole sanitary environment wasn't appropriate. So we actually wind up paying to have bathrooms and things built so that teenage girls would come back to school so they would learn education and math. So it's funny how you start off in one angle, you can wind up in very different areas. Here, obviously we have lots of activities locally. San Jose, let me get it right, San Jose, person is in a room, museum.
Oh,
thank you. Thank you.
Oh, the Tech Museum.
The Tech Museum, which we're very involved in. Thank you. We are involved in that. And again, focused upon a desire to kind of drive education and science and math skills. That's kind of where all of our efforts start. But as I say, they start there. They wind up in some very different areas. And then you're pretty active in that yourself, Mark, right? Yeah,
I'm on the board of the Children's Discovery Museum of San Jose, and then we have a philanthropic organization at Adobe. We give away 1% of our profits. I'm on that board as well. It's mainly focused around kids and obviously creative, kind of the creative side of education for kids.
Right, cool.
So we're going to open it up for questions in maybe 2 minutes, so if you can start thinking of some questions. But before we do that, maybe any last thoughts, David, on where you see tech in the next 5 years going, where you see EMC 5 years from now? I mean, you touched on kind of the third platform, which is, I would suspect, where you'd say it's going.
I mean, yeah, without repeating myself too much, that's going to be a source of innovation for all of us. And it's interesting because they really become conversations about how businesses can be transformed leveraging technology. It's really IT coming out of the back office to the middle office to the front office and changing customer experiences, changing companies' business models. That's exciting because that's a whole different ballpark for many of us. And I think that's where the excitement, the innovation, and the investment is going to wind up going.
Yeah, and we clearly see that as you move the product more to the cloud, IT plays a very important role in the product, which is not the way it used to be.
Right. In fact, you've gone through a transition yourselves in that respect, right, within Adobe.
Right. We've taken the creative product line, a couple $2 billion in revenue, and moved it from a shrink-wrap perpetual product to a cloud-based offering, which has been kind of fascinating from a Wall Street point of view, but it's also been fascinating from a product development point of view and kind of moving people over to a subscription model. And IT's played a huge role in that, so it's been fun. Okay, great. Well, let's take some questions. We are exactly on time. How about that? And my index card
Very
system
well done, Mark.
worked well. Yes.
Thanks for coming out tonight. Had a question. You referred to the third platform and mobile being a part of that. We'd love to hear a little bit about your mobile strategy, being a storage company, and if you can comment on the kind of success or insights of the Simplicity acquisition for as a part of your mobile strategy, that would be great.
Sure. So, obviously, mobile from a storage company point of view, mobile is the best thing that's happened since sliced bread, right? Because you're just creating a ton of data that needs to be managed. Now, different types of data, right? So when we talk about mobile, we're not talking about transactional type systems, file and block. We're talking about object-oriented systems where that data gets held. So it's a huge driver of storage on the back end. Where we touch it more directly is in VMware. One of our strategies through our end-user computing group is to really help people try and manage that mobile proliferation from a business point of view and how the mobile devices connect consistently to the enterprise. And then from a Pivotal point of view, really almost every application that we're building with Pivotal is expecting to be communicating via the user via a mobile device. So those are the touch points. So Pivotal has a direct touch point, VMware has a direct touch point, and the storage business, EMC information structure, is a beneficiary. Now you also mentioned Simplicity, which is a key platform, a key cloud platform in our information intelligence group, which is part of our EMC core business. And that is another great example where we are able to provide customers sync and share, but not just public cloud sync and share where they can actually store the data themselves inside the data center. So they've got a level of control and security around it. So they can decide what data is in that sync and share environment they want to be protected inside the data center with some user access on it, and what data they may want to be sitting out on a public cloud. So those are some of the connection points.
Next question.
Yeah, over here. Hi, I'm Chris Primesberger with eWeek, and pivoting off that last question, I'd like to ask a little bit about Pivotal. Could you give me a little more color, give us a little more color, David, on the strategic importance of Pivotal? And am I offline when I say that this is a possible competitor to Amazon Web Services in the marketplace?
Start off with the first question, then I'll go on to the second one. So, Pivotal is, I won't use that same pun, but I will, pivotally important for us. I couldn't resist it, but we think we're building something in the industry which is fairly unique in terms of a platform as a service application tool set for people building big data, fast data applications rapidly in unconventional ways. And therefore, we think it's going to be very important, and it's going to be, we are in the high-class problem with Pivotal right now, with the resource we have inside the company. We're kind of resource constrained compared to all the people who like to work with us. And we haven't even really brought the first platform to market yet. So it's a very high-class problem. It is not a direct competitor of Amazon. What it's doing is it's really leveraging the power of the developers. Developers want open platforms. They don't want to be locked in. So what developers want to do is write to something that is portable. So the key thing we're doing with Pivotal on the platform as a service layer is writing to a framework, which is very much an open source environment framework, and you saw IBM coming in to play a part of it, writing to a framework that when the application is written, it is portable. So it doesn't have to run on Amazon. It could run on on Amazon, it could run on a VMware cloud, it could run on a Google cloud, it could run on a Microsoft cloud. So it's really capturing the power of the developer. So indirectly, if Amazon was trying to attract a lot of developers just to work in their environments, it could have an impact on them. And that's kind of part of what they're trying to do. It's not their major focus. So it's really building this platform layer that will be independent. So again, choice. And we really want to build the world's biggest cadre of developers in the big platform, in the big data, fast data world, right into this new framework. So think of it almost as the new Linux, in terms of something that people can write to that is not locking them into the underlying environment, except in this case, the environment is the cloud, not the hardware.
Okay. Another question? Yes.
Outlandish. I look forward to this one.
What do you think of a world of data where we did with software, instead of companies keeping it to themselves, open it up to tens of millions of people, and then figure out what's in it?
Well, that's going to happen. That is going to happen. So there will be data that people want to keep inside their companies for privacy and other reasons. There will be data that people, the world, society wants to put out to the community for people to kind of do what they want to analyze it. In fact, we're working on big data a fair amount with some folks down at MIT, back home in the Boston area. And they have basically crowdsourced a set of analysts. And you can give these analysts a data set and give them a problem. And they will guarantee that the crowd-sourced environment will give you a better answer than you ever could by trying to solve the problem internally. So if it's data you're prepared to put out there from a privacy point of view, I do see a world where there's very open access to a lot of data, and people are being encouraged to do things in different and novel ways. And I think a lot of the data we're going to see in the third platform will be data that is available to a lot of people, because a lot of the third platform data is perhaps less sensitive than the rows and columns of inside your corporate accounting systems that sit inside a lot of data centers today. A lot less sensitive than the HR data that sits inside of data centers today. So I do see that environment, and I do see, for the good of companies, for the good of society, these environments where there will be massive amounts of crowdsourcing of analytics to kind of look at what's going on. And a key part of that is going to be how you visualize that data. Because in today's environments, things come back and they look like nasty, horrible spreadsheets that we all kind of have to wear glasses because we spend way too much time reading spreadsheets. And you can't do that with these big data sets. You can't summarize them in rows and columns. So the visualization of the data, to help with things like predicting where diseases are going to happen, global warming, even seismic studies and things like that, are huge applications of big data. In fact, we ran a project about a year ago where we sent a lot of reporters out to do a day in the life of the universe, and wound up publishing a book. And in fact, we have a web site based upon it as well, which is just scraping the surface of the opportunity that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I'm Ken Hausman. What do you see as your biggest threat to EMC in terms of others innovating or market movement? What worries you the most in that regard?
I believe that our biggest threat is really our ability to execute against the opportunity. The opportunity is absolutely huge. Others will catch us up if we don't innovate, if we don't keep moving, if we don't execute against our strategies. So when you kind of ask me what keeps me up at night, it's kind of really, are we organizing properly? Are we making the right decisions? Are we making those right bets? We got enough investments in the right places? Should we be doubling down in areas where we've only maybe got one bet? We should have a double bet. It's really our ability to execute as a company. I think we've positioned ourselves very well, never complacent. There's very respectable competitors out there, current ones and new ones coming. But I think we're pretty well placed. And it's really how we help ourselves and help this industry make this transition into the third platform, that's what kind of keeps me up at night. And again, it comes back to the team, back to where I started off. It's have we got the right people, the right investments to get this business from a $21-ish billion business to a $30 billion business, because we're not going to make that transition unless we're very successful in the third platform.
Anything else? Maybe while we're waiting for another question, I'm sure you guys can come up with a couple more. One thing I meant to ask you is, how do you value these M&A deals as you've gone through 70 deals? Do you have a standard model that you do? Are they all different? I mean, are you pretty disciplined about price? And
we're fairly hard-nosed about that. I mean, certainly the way you value a deal is not the way you turn around to Wall Street and say this deal is going to be an accretive deal, right? And I've always told the Wall Street folks that. Obviously, with interest rates being so low, if you can't make a deal accretive, right, with lost interest on cash, then you shouldn't be doing that deal in the first place. So we are fairly hard-nosed, cash-on-cash returns, DCF when we cover our cost of capital. So how many years is it before we cover the cost of capital with the incremental cash flow from that deal?
Right.
How many years do we expect to get a full cash-on-cash return? And I'm just not a big believer of doing the terminal value calculation and all the rest of it, because that just becomes math.
Yes.
So it's really number of years to get the cost of capital covered on the amount of money that you put in against the incremental cash flow of the deal, and then number of years to kind of get a cash-on-cash payback. To me, those are the two metrics.
Okay.
And then based upon how risky, how strategic the deal is, you can vary those
So some of the
metrics,
more
right?
competitive deals,
You may push the metrics, a little bit, but if you can't, as CFOs, we all see this. We kind of see our business teams come and say, "I must have this deal. It's strategic."
Yeah.
Okay, if it's strategic, show the cash flow.
Yeah.
Well, so it's not strategic. So we go around that a few times. They've stopped bringing those deals to me. But the first couple of years, they didn't think I was serious. So so that is how we look at it. And then what about you, Mark? Because you guys are fairly
we do
as well.
the same thing. We've kind of just introduced more of a IRR, return on invested capital kind of model. For a while, we were doing the discounted cash flow model, and I totally agree with you. The terminal value you could just make anything.
It's a math exercise.
You can make anything look good.
Exactly.
So we've started to move away more into weighted average cost of capital calculations. Same thing. Yes.
Just the flip side of the where you evaluate the success of an acquisition, which is very scientific. There was a great little line about walking away from acquisitions when you didn't think it was the right chemistry.
Yep.
What's the science in that bit?
There's no science. That's all human nature, right? That's just gut feel.
Yeah.
That is, and we have several examples of deals that look fantastic on the mathematical methodology that I just showed you. But if you think that the team, doesn't want to be acquired or doesn't want to join you, or is just going to evaporate 3 months after you do the deal, you've got to walk away. And that's not because necessarily they were bad teams; they're just different teams, right? Certain companies have more of a cultural fit. On the early stages of this, people say, "Oh, you're an East Coast company; you can't buy a West Coast company, businesses." Well, I think we've kind of passed that stage, so that's not the issue. It's really kind of what are the values, what are the management systems, what are the processes by which you measure success, and some companies are just radically different, and that's just experience and spending time understanding the soft side and talking to people. There's always a science and an art here. You're working with a company, you want to get a deal done. Maybe it's competitive, therefore you have to be a little careful in case you don't get it. But you have to have enough of a conversation with a team before you get to the definitive document to know that it's going to work.
How about, on a totally different subject, leveraging unique markets for talent? So whether it's a lower cost geo or just areas that you feel are great areas to recruit?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, back from my example where we were close to 40% in Massachusetts, now we're less than 20. Obviously a huge presence here in the Valley, which is not something that EMC, back in 2002, we had 1,500 people here in the Valley. Now it's well over 7,000. So it's a big transition. That's been a big area of growth for us. But I think we all know this is a global market. Most of us running inside global companies have recognized that, back to my STEM and where the engineering graduates coming from, there are many more engineering graduates coming from places that are not in the US, as well as those who are being trained here and going home again. So we have, over the last few years, taken a very global approach. We set up a program where you gave a code name so it kind of looked consistent, and then we set up a series of centers of excellence around the world. We set them up exactly the same way. So the same approach to how we manage them, how they get cross-charged, same approach to universal relations, same approach to branding, so we could really set up the EMC global footprint. So we started off, not surprisingly, in Bangalore, where we're up to about 4,000 people in Bangalore, India. Then we were into China, where we're in 3 locations in China. And then we got a little creative. We then started doing some interesting analysis to see kind of where different skill sets were sitting.
Right.
And we went into St. Petersburg, Russia, for some very mathematical skill sets to help with some of the storage tiering technology. We went into Israel, which is a real innovation hub, and we bought a number of companies but created a center in Israel. Egypt, not so much for technology, but for great language skill, for services around Europe. And then what was interesting is that program became so successful that some of our existing facilities said, why am I not a center of excellence? So the first place that EMC went to after it branched out of the US was went to Cork Island. Right. And Cork has become a big campus for us. And Cork opted in. They said, I want to become part of that program. I want to become a COE and get treated the same way. What was interesting was that people were actually leaving Cork. So the business units were actually taking resources out of Cork before we made that decision. We put it under the program. We put in a strong general manager. We created the university relationships. And guess what? That's now a growing center for us as well.
Have you done anything from a back office perspective leveraging those locations?
Yeah, we have. I mean, we've basically got well over 50% of our IT in those locations. 50, well over 50. We have, in some of our software development teams, some of our software development groups, I think the biggest one we have is about 65% of the team working out of those centers. Not one center, but across a whole range of those centers. So we've certainly done a lot more than just QA, test, dev work from a software development point of view. And then what we've also done is we created an in-house, we call it Global Business Services, that is an in-house outsourcing process engine. We actually used some partners. We actually used Accenture to help us set that up to get it jump-started, but then we kind of built it internally. So what we're now doing is we're taking anything that's a repeatable process. It started off, obviously, things like accounting, finance, a lot of the payables, receivables, but now people like the sales teams have got proposal teams over there.
Right.
So it's really become much more innovative, and there are about 20 different departments around the company using this thing we call GBS, which itself is now in multiple countries.
And so I'm still waiting for questions, by the way.
Oh,
there we go. Okay.
Oh, we got a question in the back.
David, could you talk about what EMC's cloud strategy is? You talked about businesses moving to the cloud. So if a business is moving to the cloud, they're obviously not buying a Symmetrix or an Isilon. How do you approach that? And the second part of the question is there seems to be a resurgence of direct attached storage pioneered by Google and Amazon. And again, what are your thoughts on, is that a threat to EMC?
All right, that's a long question to wrap up the evening with, right? So I'll try and give you a short answer to what is a very good question. And hopefully I've touched on this in my comments. So first of all, people think of cloud and they immediately jump to service providers, but cloud is turning IT into a service, inside your IT department and outside. So when we talk about cloud computing, we are including turning internal IT environments into cloud environments, as well as working with traditional outsourcers, third parties, and some of the mega clouds. So we have that broad construct. Believe it or not, a lot of our service providers and our selling to cloud providers is the fastest growing part of our business. So for example, one web scale company alone this year, in the first half of the year, has bought 85 petabytes of Isilon. So it'd be an incorrect statement to say that people are not deploying our technology in cloud scale companies. And that is a web scale company a well-known web scale company who won't let us mention them by name, but you don't deploy 85 petabytes unless you've got a really big need. And then you have a whole set of companies who are setting up business class clouds or hybrid clouds. And some of those are, in fact, using Symmetrics, as well as mid-tier platforms, Atmos, and Isilon. And then you're right, there is, in some industries, a resurgence of server-based storage. And we have assets like a company we bought called Scale.io, where we can basically turn that into network storage. And we're also doing work through VMware to go after internal storage as well. So a lot of different aspects of how we're addressing the cloud from a storage point of view.
One more, and then we'll do a quick wrap-up. Yeah.
Okay, Keith Lance, Lance Consulting. I'm curious, of the 70 acquisitions, if you could be a little more specific and quantify which ones were federated and operate like VMware versus which were consolidated versus anything else.
Okay. The big ones that were federated, what we typically do is we will do one, if I call it seminal acquisition to get us into a sector that is federated, and then that company will actually then go on and acquire companies within its line of business. So VMware was obviously one which was federated at the federation layer, and in fact VMware has also bought a number of companies as well as grown organically. Within the EMC business, Documentum, that we had the pleasure to acquire Mark for a few years, was an example where we moved into an adjacent market, information intelligence, and then since we've acquired Documentum, we've probably done 7 or 8 acquisitions in that space, all of which have then been integrated into that. In the storage marketplace, the bigger acquisitions, so for example, when we acquired Data Domain a few years ago, we actually did something unusual. We bought a company, then we did a reverse integration. So we took the backup recovery assets we had inside of EMC and folded it under Data Domain to create something called our Backup Recovery Systems Group. So again, that first one was federated within the storage business, then we did a reverse integration. So we've probably had about 7 or 8 that you could say were truly federated, and then they've in turn created a string of other acquisitions which have all become integrated.
Well, that's great. Thank you, David. Maybe a few comments that would summarize and leave the crowd with some really
Well, I'm just going to summarize
thought.
by Mark thanking you. So a round of applause for Mark, please.
Thank you.
Great moderator. And thank you. Thank you. It's been a fun evening.
David and Mark, thank you for sharing your perspectives with us so freely. We really appreciate it. As a very small token, but hopefully a very nice one, we offer you the Churchill Club speaker T-shirt.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Please wear that in very fine health. Thank you again to EMC. A recording of this program will be available hopefully within a couple of days on the Churchill Club YouTube channel. And you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time. Good night.
Thank you.
Okay.